wanted to get to, Arnie had a question before the break about what, as a listing agent, how do you handle a low appraisal, right?
Right, yes.
And so I think it depends on a lot of different variables. Sometimes we're going to, maybe dispute the appraisal and provide other comps. Sometimes we're going to put the house back on the market because we don't agree with it, or maybe there were multiple offers. Sometimes appraisers view things differently, so one appraiser might view it differently than another. Sometimes we might encourage the buyer to choose a new lender, get a new appraisal.
Right.
So it's really going to depend on a lot of variables, but ultimately it's the seller's choice. The seller sometimes maybe the seller will agree and accept the appraisal price. It depends on the disparity and the difference. But there's a lot of different steps you go through. You have a conversation with the seller, you give them the options, and then you decide from there. There's certainly times we put the home back on the market because we don't agree with the appraisal. There's certainly times where we'll submit additional information to dispute the appraisal. And I think there's times when the seller will say, you know what, it's not worth the hassle over a couple of $1,000s. I don't want to put it back on the market and deal with another 30 or 60 days to find a buyer. So let's just go ahead and agree to agree. And then there are also times where, we're so confident that the home that the appraisal's wrong and that there's enough interest in the home because of supply and demand that the buyer will end up paying the difference in cash. So if the appraisal comes in short, and the buyer has the availability and the money and the debt to income, the buyer can make up the difference in cash so that the value is there. So I think it really does depend on each specific situation. But those are kind of some of the options that we go through when that low appraisal comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just tell you that a lot of times, back in the day, before, right after the time when appraisers were taken out of the lender's control, meaning that we couldn't necessarily talk to the appraiser about value. Back in the day, you said, hey, I need this to come in at this price, and if you don't, after you do it again, I'm going to take you off the list.
Right. Now you don't have that.
Yeah. I don't have that. I'm totally happy, so it's totally away from that. And that's actually a good thing.
And I think what I will say is, a couple of years ago, we had, a lot of change in the appraisal industry, and there's a lot of uproar from the real estate industry. But I do think it professionalized the industry, and I feel like the appraisers, we have less incompetence on the appraisal front today than we used to.
I agree, because every time an appraisal comes in, and it does come in low from time to time, and I have people looking at it, and I say, well, give me some comparables. I will tell you that I would say 9.5 times out of 10, comparables aren't worth using.
Yeah.
And here's a tip. Here's a ninja tip for all you realtors and sellers out there as far as looking at comps. I just learned this from my appraiser group today. Any comp that is more than 20% higher or lower than the gross living area,
they don't want to use.
They don't want to use.
Yeah, it's got to be comparable property. It's got to be comparable time, comparable location.
So 20%.
And what you may think is a comp isn't. And I think that's. But at the same time, I feel like there are options. And in a market that's as competitive as this, when you're representing the seller, it's going to depend in each situation.
And I've seen, I saw a seller this week drop his price. $12,000 just to close the deal.
Yeah. And again, every situation is going to be different.
I'm glad to see appraisers kind of keeping a little bit of a control on the market.
Yeah.
The whole situation is what created the bust.
Correct. And we don't want a lot of the stuff that got weeded out with, and I think that a lot of the structure. Now, there's certainly some flaws in it still, but honestly, I feel like we have a less adversarial relationship with appraisers than we used to. I feel like we better communication flow. I think what happened with the changes in the industry is it weeded out the bad ones. I think we've got a lot of great appraisers, and I feel like the communication between appraisers and realtors has gotten a lot better, more professionalized, where the appraiser's open to dialogue about certain things, and certainly I think appraisers understand that we obviously have a vested interest, but we have some experience too, and I think they're looking to come up with a value and a report and not that's fair.
Yeah, if you bring them a comp that they missed, they'll use it. They won't.
Maybe it's a for sale by owner. It didn't hit MLS, or maybe it's this, or
maybe it's a contract pending that hasn't closed yet.
Right, but hey, wait a week, and we know because it's our listing.
Right.
We've run into that because the number of homes we list, where we'll look at a report and we're like, look, we know this comp's coming because it's our sale and it closes in a week.
Right.
It's gonna change your numbers. Will you redo the appraisal in a week or whatever? So there's always variables that come into play. So